Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our Beyond the Buy Box podcast community group here. I am very excited for this one. You can see we have two guests, and I'm joined by my partner in crime here at Pot2, Charlotte Miles, who is our vice president of our international client development side of our business. And she has a wide background. She was on the retail side. She came from Amazon as a vendor manager. We worked together at J&J and at Bic, and now here at Pot2. And I'm excited, Charlotte, for you to join the conversation. And our shining star guest here is Martin Heubel, who is the founder, owner of Consulters, a Amazon strategy company. And Martin has worked with so many brands to help in every way to maintain profitable growth for businesses. And Martin, you also are an ex-Amazonian as a senior category leader, and also have worked with a variety of Fortune 100 global CPG brands. And I'm excited, just as our main focus for these conversations has really been around control. And how do brands maintain control of all of the work that they put into not only holding on to the buy box, but doing it in a profitable way? So I'm excited that we all get to hear the goods of your experiences and advice today. But Charlotte, I'll turn it to you to kick us off here.
Awesome. Yes. And I'm so excited, Martin, to have you on. We've been in the similar circuits for a while, and it's just wonderful to get a one-on-one chat with you. So thank you for joining us. I did have some questions. So could you walk us through a time when you had a brand or client where you've worked with them and they were hit by a major marketplace challenge? So what happened behind the scenes and how did that impact their business, and how did you support them through that?
Great question. And Jen, Charlotte, thank you so much for having me on. It's an absolute honor to be on the show. And Charlotte, I mean, look, I think we're seeing it almost daily, right? In our work with clients, in our work as manufacturing brands, that I think the world of Amazon is fairly unpredictable. And these big challenges roll around the corner almost like without any moment's notice. And I mean, we are now in January of 2026. The new year has just begun, right? For anyone who's listening in, you may even still be in your annual vendor negotiations. So I think one of the most recent examples that I think we are seeing across the board, and that I'm seeing across the board with my clients, is this ever evolving margin hunger that Amazon and their vendor managers are really kind of pushing forward, which really has a lot of vendors baffled, who thought, hey, after the pandemic, after we've seen this tremendous growth that now has moderated, we understand that for 1 year or 2 years, the pendulum swings back to profit focus, right? But that we are now in year 4 or even in year 5 for some brands, where Amazon consistently comes and demands for more margins, more net PPM as we all know it, right? And thereby also sometimes takes actions through sanctioning the buy box, maybe even taking it away, right? In order to incentivize brands to listen to the demands a little bit more closely than they may otherwise do. I think this is currently, at least what I'm seeing right now, one of the biggest challenges for brands, where they're also just asking themselves, okay, where does this end? How can we kind of find a more sustainable business model? And I think this is certainly one of the top issues that a lot of executives are currently having on top of their mind right now.
I can very much empathize with the feeling like it's never going to end. Maybe building on recent conversations that you've guided brands who have come to you. And I learned that every year there's always an area where Amazon will typically go deep and dig. What have you seen so far in terms of hotspot areas that seem to be coming up quite frequently? I've heard some in the industry share that programs might be a bit light in terms of a margin, accretive gain that helps brands feel like they're, investing behind something that brings visibility. I think every brand has different results in those types of programs, but this year it's very much focused on cost. But I'm curious to hear where a bit of the squeeze might be happening.
Yeah, maybe we just take a step back for a second, right? And understand, okay, in what dimensions does Amazon currently try to kind of build and continue to build its retail business, particularly on the vendor side. And I think if you're looking and zooming out a little bit, the last few years already under its CEO, Andy Jassy, have been marked by a cost-cutting focus. And now that a lot of these excessive cost centers have been eradicated, the online retailer is kind of moving on to see, okay, how much can they yield in additional cost savings when it comes to automation? when it comes to offshoring. We just last week read again that new layoffs may be on the horizon. So we're facing a reality where fewer corporate employees at Amazon will have to shoulder the work with and together with a similar or even a higher number of brands. So realistically, there's two things really happening right now that we're also seeing unfold in these negotiations, and that is a significant focus on automation and offshoring. So how can Amazon, particularly through its vendor service program, reduce the number of headcount, reduce the number of conditionality that they have to promise to vendors while keeping the investment the same, and while also not introducing new programs or initiatives that increase the burden of having to deliver anything manually. And this is, I think, why there's this notion also among a lot of brands that, hey, Amazon asks us for more investment. Each year, they come with an additional 2% request to invest into a marketing or to a co-op accrual. But we do not really see the return on investment, A, quantified, and then B, backed up by performance reports. And I think this is the one reality we are facing. For brands that are having annual net sales beyond, I would say, like 15 to 20 million, where vendor managers are pivoting their attention very much this year is towards supply chain initiatives. Once again, for Amazon, very interesting. It really kind of falls into this whole dynamic of trying to reduce the inefficiencies, the churn they have seen with a lot of brands and vendors. And interestingly, we see this focus beyond the two biggest marketplaces, Northern Europe and the European markets, but also more and more in expansion marketplaces where Amazon becomes increasingly focused on these initiatives. Think of Japan, think of Australia, and particularly here in Europe, but also in the US. In 2026, Amazon is very much interested in, again, backwards integrating with suppliers, meaning they say, hey, we know you hire your carriers, you hold your carrier partners to deliver to different distribution and fulfillment centers to us. But why do we not do that just for yourself? And ideally, you have a slight cost saving. And you're, of course, as a result, also willing to kind of share this cost saving with us. And what's interesting here for Amazon is they get more ownership about the inventory and over the inventory, and thereby they get better reliability about how much inventory they can hold at any given point in time. They can shift inventory also at very short notice to different fulfillment nodes if demands all of a sudden spikes in one US state over the other or in one European market over the other, and just has more control to cost optimize its whole value and supply chain with first-party vendors. Does it always yield the desired return on investment for brands? I mean, I think everyone needs to run this business case, and it depends very much on how you're currently set up. But I think what's really interesting to see is that there's this kind of stark pivot away just from, okay, give us more additional base accruals, co-op accruals, towards actual and value driving transportation and supply chain solutions in 2026.
It's fascinating as they move from that more simplistic model. What you're describing is a way more complex model, though, as well. And I suppose as you get to see so many people's AVNs right now, and you're like so well connected, what do you think are probably the emerging risks you see in that, though? Because as we move from one to the other, we know it's not a perfect world. So what are you seeing bubbling up as like things you would flag to the brand? Maybe like a couple of things that you're like, you know what? Those are watch out areas that could go wrong in this.
It depends what the actual ask is. I think I would always be very critical. And I mean, one of the key issues that I see a lot of account managers and sales teams make is that they, first of all, look at whatever Amazon offers in terms of transportation and logistics initiatives as a given, right? So it is a non-negotiable. So if your vendor manager says, hey, for certain transportation initiatives, we require 2% of an accrual fee of your net sales, then a lot of brand leaders will say, that's way too expensive, we cannot do that. But if you then actually scrape beneath the surface and you're looking at, okay, maybe we need to talk to your logistics and transportation teams internally first to understand what are your actual costs right now with your own carrier, and what are also the associated hidden costs beneath that. So how many chargebacks do you have? Do you struggle with a lot of non-compliance in terms of processes? Do you struggle with unpaid invoices as a result of process non-compliance? It's the nature of things, right? I mean, if you're in the sales department, you have your sales department glasses on, you have a tunnel vision. But I think this is also why our industry and a lot of industry leaders hammer this point down, that we need to kind of break down silos and we need to kind of also cross-collaborate across functions even more, because Charlotte, as you rightfully say, it becomes more complex. We're moving towards a direction where e-commerce and dealing with Amazon is no longer a starting point for brands in the online space, and it matures, and we're now having to be the adult in the room. And that means that we increasingly need to talk to finance, supply chain teams, marketing and brand teams to really rope them into the same direction as we in the sales department want to go. And in terms of other watch outs, just to summarize it, I mean, when you change your supply chain setup, look at the contracts beyond Amazon that you are having. A classic example is brands are very excited to adopt a VPay model. So this is the one where Amazon actually sends trucks and trailers to your warehouse, picks up the goods, and distributes it to their own warehouses and fulfillment network. Now, that is great, right? If you can save money through that, perfect. But what a lot of brand leaders actually overlook, and sometimes even their supply chain teams, is that it takes effective volume out of the contracts that you have with existing carriers. And that may mean that you're paying more for all of your other retail partners and all of the other shipments beyond Amazon, which is probably not the best return on investment when you're looking at it from a total perspective. Look at the pros and cons, evaluate it holistically. And I always advocate for the fact that, yes, talk to your logistics teams first, let them run the business case, but then also increasingly kind of onboard your finance business partners so that you also get this finance perspective. And then usually, if you're doing this a couple of times, I know it's hard in the beginning because nobody wants to deal with Amazon. So you need to also rope in your leadership team to get this kind of support. But once you do, you really see how this unfolds in a very effective and efficient manner.
So true. We've often said breaking down silos, right? But it's never been more relevant. It's that total visibility, onboarding everyone. It's easier said than done, but it has shifted from being able to be a sales initiative, hasn't it? It's gone straight into it. This is connected commerce in the truest sense. We see a lot of narrative around that, but you really do have to think end to end, which, yeah, we've hit the nail on the head.
I think it's really interesting also it comes down to choices. There's one thing where Amazon is going to push. So when it comes to supply chain, kind of efficiencies, automation, and trying to help also give value back to brands. I know other choices that might not be as easy to pull off. I know my experience at J&J, I know yours as well, Charlotte. And even at BIC, sometimes when your portfolio is just unhealthy, there might be segments of the portfolio that, due to wide distribution, due to different promotional practices, that it sometimes just takes making a tough choice to go a different path, whether that's working with an authorized third party to help raise a healthy way of going to market. If you had to guide our audience and our community members with, they could make a choice of all the different levers to pull that feels approachable and actionable, albeit probably not easy to pull off. But if you had to pick the one or two kind of pieces and tactics for them to take action, what would that be?
I think it's twofold, right? I think the first one is really to identify and really to spend a long time on understanding what value do you bring to the table in this trade relationship. Because I think we glance over this very quickly as sales leaders and we just say, yeah, of course, we have the brand, we have our products, it's all good and fine. But that's usually just the surface, right? If you scratch beneath that, you typically see that Amazon is valuing your market segment position. Of course, your brand position, etc., your brand equity falls into that. But if you have been a fairly reliable business partner for Amazon for a long time, this falls into weight too, right? If Amazon has exclusive products from you, all of this value that we bring to the table to invest into better packaging, to invest into a more sturdy supply chain, those are all things that we sometimes take for granted, as well as just listing all of our new products. And I think what we as sales leaders increasingly need to ask ourselves is, what is the price tag we're willing to hang around all of these actions, particularly in trade negotiations, where sometimes the opposing party, in this case your vendor manager, seems to forget that this is a value that you are willing to kind of bring to the table, but also where you potentially need to ask yourself at some point, am I potentially willing to at least cast doubt over these concessions that I have been giving over the past and that now Amazon takes for granted? But they shouldn't be, right? I mean, if we talk with a Walmart, if we work with a Kroger, with a Target, whoever it is, those discussions are on eye level. And sometimes they don't feel like this with Amazon. So the first thing we really need to understand is, what are our pressuring points? What is the value that we bring to the table? And where do these value propositions overlap with what Amazon wants to achieve? And then also understand, okay, where do we have mutual areas to win? And where are the more contagious points, right? Where are these kind of weird areas where we want something from Amazon, but Amazon doesn't care? But then also on the opposite spectrum, where is something that Amazon wants, but we wouldn't prioritize? And all of a sudden, these two elements can link with each other in those trade discussions. So if Amazon wants your full selection, but also wants a better net PPM target, well, maybe we need to ask ourselves, okay, is giving Amazon the full selection still the right choice to make? Or do we need to potentially pull back on that slightly and say, hey, you can choose one of the two, right? So either full selection and the full breadth of our assortment, particularly if you're exposed in fast-moving consumer goods categories towards lower priced items, which we know are also one of the most densely distributed and have faced the highest pricing pressure, or you want to reach your net PPM targets. Which one is it? Because if you don't have this strategic clarity, how can you be expected to make profitable decisions? Right? So I think sometimes it gets lost because we have to put out so many fires day by day. And I totally get it. And I totally empathize with that. But I think what we need to do as an industry and as industry leaders is to give our teams the space to kind of understand why we make certain decisions. And if you are actually the operating executive who's having to make those decisions, factor where these value propositions overlap and where they don't, to then find a way also throughout your day-to-day negotiations where you can ask for value in return for what you bring to the table as well.
Fantastic. And I am kind of regretting that our paths didn't cross when I was at J&J or earlier in my time at BIC. So for anyone that's getting exposure to you right now, consider yourself very lucky.
I appreciate it.
I think it's just so practical. And also, I can very much empathize with many folks out there who, when you're in a pressure cooker and you feel the need to work through speed, you just want to move fast, that it's tricky to pause and do your pros and cons and strategically position yourself, because there's always something that Amazon or any other, partner that you can offer them. So I love that kind of landing piece of advice. I know, Charlotte, any other last thoughts for us today too?
Yeah, I was just thinking we're in AVN season for a lot of people I'm speaking to, they're nowhere near closed. So if we can think next 30 days, Martin's top tips of what can you do? Because a lot of what we've discussed takes time, to Jen's point as well. So what can we give our listeners that they can walk away today and go, hey, over the next month, that is what I'm going to try and deliver? What would you recommend?
Look, I think I would keep it simple, right? Know your walkaway points, define them and quantify them, and also don't shy away from escalations. A recent example that I increasingly bring up also in my client work is, if you are actually the negotiator, don't shy away from this escalation, but you need to do the hard work up front, right? We're now towards end of January. So for most European brands, they want to close by end of February. In the US, you may have even shorter or a little bit longer deadlines, but the same principles apply. And what I typically say is like, look, if you know that you will not be able to find a solution with your vendor manager, then escalating it to a top-to-top meeting, for example, is the consequential logic and consequential result. But you wouldn't let your leadership team run into a cold room for a meeting either. So you need to increase the temperature before they come in. And you do that by underlining what you're willing and not willing to do, right? So you need to prepare, even if you're saying, great, this cannot be solved at my level anymore, you need to prepare the negotiation from both sides so that your leadership team can eventually step in and actually unlock this negotiation situation for you. So again, become very clear about what your do's and don'ts are in this negotiation, communicate them, but most importantly, really sit down and quantify them. Speak internally with your leadership team what they are and not are willing to accept in terms of growth concessions, profit concessions, and other cost support concessions to get national cost price increases around and over the line, and then act accordingly. Right? Look at your options. You said it, Jen, right? A hybrid or 3P model can sometimes make sense. It's a little bit more difficult in the United States, but it's very much an open opportunity for brands here in Europe. It doesn't fix the leaks to a lack of profitability, but if you see that Amazon is just bullying you into more investments without any underlying rationale, then of course, diversification will be key. And I believe strongly that also from your leadership team, if you make up this business case, they will follow this guidance, because they also are increasingly getting aware to the fact that if you're just becoming more dependent on one retailer, namely Amazon, this is the normal business 101, right? It is not sustainable. So again, do the homework, do the basics, and then also heat the room for your leadership team.
That was the best way to end, Martin. Do your homework, know your audience, and heat the room. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much, both to you, Charlotte, and Martin. Charlotte is my co-host for today, and Martin for imparting all of your knowledge and advice for community.
My pleasure. And thanks so much for having me. It was a real joy.
Absolutely. Thank you.